From the Homestead Studios in Santa Clarita, California, it's Just the Tip-Sters with Melissa Morgan.
Judicious yet juicy.
If you've got a tip for Melissa, new evidence on a cold case, a news story that jogged a lost memory, why Eddie Money only sang about 2 tickets to paradise when you know he paid for the groupies to come along, anything, tell us about it by calling the Tip-Ster hotline at 832-TIPSTER. That's 832-847-7837, or send an email to jttipsters@gmail.com. And now here's your host, floating on a wave of righteous justice and a year's supply of Claritin D, Melissa Morgan.
More cowbell. Oh yes, producer Mark here speaking my soul. I'm going to warn the tipsters right now. I may sound like more of a dude than I normally do.
Oh, and, you don't sound like a dude.
I do quite often, but I have a new fresh supply of tissues right next to me in case we need to take a break. So I need to blow my nose. Apparently it's running like a faucet.
It's windy here.
It's very windy.
The hills of Santa Clarita.
I feel so bad for my friends, back in the Midwest and the East Coast are like, oh, it's supposed to be really cold and during the day, like in the 20s and overnight and down to 0. And I'm like, yeah, it's going to be 80 today. It's January in Southern California, and I'm going to lean in on something sharp.
And Santa Ana winds to make allergies just awful.
Yeah,
awful.
Last night was remarkably bad. Poor producer Mark had to put up with multiple sneezes from me, and my eyes started to get tiny and filled with sand, and the faucet, the running of the nose is just...
And then my allergies have the effect of making it feel like there's a great big giant rubber Super Bowl right in the middle of my forehead.
We have different seasonal allergies, producer Mark and I, but we do occasionally come to fisticuffs over the Claritin D. So,
well, we haven't in a while.
Not in a while, but so thank you for mentioning Eddie Money, which was perfect, and I am reminded of the little tumblers that I got you for Christmas. One was misheard song lyrics.
Oh, and that's right.
One says, right. I've got 2 chickens to paralyze. Which I don't know why. Right.
Oh,
I don't know why anyone needs to paralyze 2 chickens, but misheard lyrics are priceless to me.
Yeah.
And judicious and juicy is, I'm going to make a shirt that says that with my
Where
cricket.
the hell is that from?
I'm going to tell you, I'm so, sometimes you get reviews that make your heart sing. And we have some reviewers that are just, some tipster listeners that take the time to review that are poetic. So we got one from Apple Podcasts in Canada. Brandon, I'm going to think maybe the name is Brandon, but it's brand.don, but maybe it's maybe Brand Stoker or something. But if it's Brandon is a male, I don't know. I don't know a lot of female Brandons, but the reviewer said, I love Melissa's radio voice, which is very sweet considering I sound like a dude right now, and storytelling. And by the way, I really want to try that Whole Foods cranberry orange jam. so Whole Foods.
There's somebody who's been listening.
Yeah, if he or she, I think it's a he, wants to try the Whole Foods cranberry orange relish. And then this reviewer is just magnificent. I love part of the creativity is if you hate Apple Podcasts and hate making a username, I getcha. Totally getcha. So this reviewer named themselves Nobody You Know, and the title of their review is Goes In Way Deeper Than the Tip. So I couldn't be more in love with this review. And they mean it in a very lovely way. It's they're saying that we go deeper, which is, deeper, longer, and uncut, like South Park, except that we go in deeper than the tip. And the review is beautiful, saying that the reviewer found us just a few weeks ago and has gone back binging 3 months of of episodes, and they have quite a few left to do because we have like 173 or something maybe.
Yes, this is episode 174.
174, okay. So what one of the other beautiful descriptors that this reviewer used is that we are conscientious of the victims and families and how they feel while being judicious yet juicy. So judicious and juicy.
That definitely we should put that on some T-shirts.
Isn't that poetic?
I'm reading the review right now.
Yeah, it just popped up in the last day or so, and I thought it was quite lovely. So thank you so much, my beautiful tipsters, for that. If you have the time to go to Apple Podcasts, if you could rate, review, subscribe to our podcast, we'd be grateful. Those are the things that help other people find us. And we, don't have a big marketing team or a network or someone to say, hey, take a look at this. But we'd be really grateful for that if you could do that. If you have a case idea you want us to cover, which the next couple that we're covering, not this one was a personal one of mine, but if you, the next couple we're covering are suggestions from our wonderful tipsters. Please feel free to call us at 832-847-7837. Email us at jttipsters@gmail.com. You can send us a message on our Facebook page. Any way you can get to us. We'd be delighted to hear the cases that you want us to cover. And this case is an especially interesting one to me for a myriad of reasons. And it's an old case, yet it's very timely, and including just in this last week, something happened that was very, very similar to what happened. And you don't want to lose the victim in the story, but sometimes the perpetrators become a bigger story than the victim. But the victim had such an interesting storied life, and the perpetrator, her life was put out there by several Hollywood companies and actresses, and it's sort of interesting. But I want it to be known as, the case of Mabel Monohan, because she was the victim. Her perpetrator, one of her perpetrators, there was a group actually, but the one that got the most attention was Barbara Graham, which we'll talk about, but sort of in a parallel case. This week, the first federal execution of a female in 70 years was Lisa Montgomery. Now, it was the 13th of January of this year, 2021. I have seen so many podcast hosts come out against her execution, whether they are proponents of the death penalty or completely anti-death penalty. They're really upset at the fact that Lisa Montgomery was executed. And I don't know enough about all of the case and cases to speak intelligently on this, but what I can tell you is I am familiar with the person that Lisa Montgomery ended her life, and that's Bobby Joe Stennett. And the only reason I'm really familiar with that is because of the documentary Nobody Saw a Thing. So this small town in Missouri, it was under 400 people. So Ken Rex McElroy was killed in the town square by probably, locals who were tired of everything he had done, which was a lot. He just didn't succeed in killing people for luck, or he was a bad shot. I don't know, but it wasn't that he didn't try, because he sure did.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
And we did an episode on him.
We did. And the other large case in this very small town of Skidmore was Bobby Joe Stennett, who was this 23-year-old, beautiful, young, newlywed expecting her first baby, and went onto an online forum talking about these little rat terriers that she and her husband bred, and was going to sell one to a woman from a neighboring state in Kansas from Lisa Montgomery. And Lisa shows up to the house under the pretense of buying a little rat terrier from pregnant Bobby Joe Stennett, and strangles her and cuts the baby out of her stomach. and takes the baby and says she's had a baby. And it doesn't take long to find her and arrest her. Now, here's where I don't know all of the details. Lisa Montgomery was 38 at the time. She wasn't a child. She was an adult. She is listed as having epilepsy, bipolar disorder, was, roundly abused by a stepfather who'd had an extra room built onto their home where he could, rape her. Her mother pimped her out to make money to pay the bills. She got married at the age of 18. Of course, at the age of 18, if this is really your background, you're not going to, make good choices. Her husband was abusive. It sounds like a very terrible life. And we know hurt people can sometimes hurt other people. That phrase, hurt people hurt people. Yeah. I just, it's just not good enough. That's just not good enough for me. Lisa Montgomery had time to change her mind. She didn't have to drive across state lines from Kansas to Missouri. She didn't have to strangle a 23-year-old expectant mother. She didn't have to cut a baby out of her stomach, which, by the way, the little girl survived. She could have stopped anywhere along the way. And maybe her quote unquote mental health issues, her physical issues, her physiological issues, maybe all of those things would have precluded her from being able to make those proper choices, but it's just not good enough for me. I am sorry for her execution if this has brought even more pain to those involved in the case. Her family members, I don't know if anyone was there. I don't think anyone would have been there to support her because it sounds like she didn't have a very good life and people around her that would, be there for her. But I just don't know enough to make an intelligent statement. And those who are very upset at the fact that she was executed, I know you probably know much more. I don't know if it's because she was a woman or because of her past treatment, because I just don't feel like it's not fair to just because she's a woman to not execute her when she executed another. And I don't think it's fair if you don't apply the same methods to a man who executes someone. Not a lot of people seem to be bothered by, except for those that are completely anti-death penalty, by a man who kills someone. But this was one of those crimes. You would have to say someone is mentally ill to do something like this. Is that enough? Is that enough to not execute them? I've changed my mind quite a bit on the death penalty. Quite a bit. I was very much eye for an eye. You do this to me, I do this to you. And I don't know that solves anything. I don't know that it's cheaper to get rid of someone as opposed to house them for their life. I have had people much smarter than me give me both sides of that people in the legal world, that it's cheaper to keep someone for the rest of their life and house them and feed them as opposed to going through the huge decades-long appeal process, paying a court-appointed attorney, etc. I don't know. I know I'm not the judge, and I'm certainly not the executioner, but I wasn't going to publicly come out and say Lisa Montgomery should not be executed. I'm not well-versed enough to make that decision. However, Mabel Monohan's case is fascinating. Even in 1953 in Burbank, in a beautiful little ranch-style house. And I believe 6 decades later, we can say not a lot has changed in the legal world, especially if it's a woman. and whether a woman takes another person's life. You can ask producer Mark. I've been researching this case and thought I was ready to go. And then I would go a little further down a rabbit hole and say, can we wait and not record it right now? Can we wait? I could probably spend a very long time researching Mabel's case and Barbara Graham's involvement and do an episode in, a month. But this case, and I do not particularly, I don't particularly want to cover a lot of old cases because either there isn't a lot known or what is known has changed over the decades, and I don't like that. I don't like not having all of the correct information to present to the tipsters. So, but this one is very fascinating and as fascinating about the victim as it is interesting and layered about the perpetrator, because the victim had such a fascinating life and yet wanted to live this quiet life in her beautiful little ranch style home in Burbank that pretty much looks the same as it did.
It's still there?
Yeah. And it's wow. Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating. I found on Zillow an ad. It was for sale. The last time it was for sale was 2012. Dreamy home in the heart of the prized Rancho District. Now, the Rancho District of Burbank is close to the Equestrian Center for those of you who are local.
And we should point out to the tipsters, this is Burbank, California. So
I'm sorry.
Southern California.
Yeah, Southern California. I apologize. Yeah, it's Burbank, California. Sunlit and emotional, with an open floor plan that flows perfectly. Large living room with brick-mantled fireplace and built-in bookshelves, beveled front bayed windows, formal dining room, chef's country kitchen with white Jenner appliances, island with mixed-use materials, very artistic. Breakfast nook with benches, enchanting sunroom overlooks a lovely landscape garden. A cozy library with a wall of bookshelves could be used as a third bedroom. Now that's what I was wondering, because it was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath when Mabel lived there, but now they're saying it could be a third bedroom. It looks like they've made, some additions or some improvements, but it is basically the same.
I've never heard the term emotional used.
I haven't either. Sunlit and emotional with an open floor plan that flows perfectly. I haven't either. This is the neighborhood of your dreams, and you can walk to Disney, Starbucks, and pavilions, renowned public schools close to Griffith Park and the Equestrian Center, and it's zoned for horses. Now, I didn't see the backyard being that big, but it is very, very interesting. The house looks the same. So then this case is covered really beautifully starting in 1953 with, I have to tell you, the subscription to newspapers.com is just priceless. I'm not a big fan of like genealogy, and I don't really care so much about that kind of stuff. It's interesting to a point, but I don't go down like a genealogy rabbit hole. Newspapers.com is owned by Ancestry, and I love reading journalism from the past. The verbiage, the way it's, and I had this sort of misguided idea that journalism from the past was much more truthful. And in some ways it is. But this case basically says this is a well-written PR campaign for anti-death penalty. I mean, it's fascinating. So I love all of these articles. I had shown producer Mark some of these pictures. I mean, let's just get started. So Mabel Monohan is a fascinating woman, and she is married to her husband, George Monohan, and they are known as the Great Monohans. Now, producer Mark said they should be he didn't say they should be, he said the Magnificent Monohans. And I was like, no, it's the Great Monohans, but the Magnificent Monohans would have
rolled off the tongue a little better.
It would have. So after Mabel's death, which we'll get into, her best friend has a photo album, her best friend of 20 years, who also lived in Van Nuys in the Valley. And she pulls out for a journalist for the Valley Times, which is in North Hollywood, in August of 1953, pulls out these pictures of Mabel all through her life. This is the kind of friend she was. She had a photo album of pictures of her friend. So the Great Monahans, it was George and Mabel. They were a roller skating novelty team. They traveled around, they did tent shows and circuses, and they were, this picture looks fake, but it wouldn't have been faked in the 30s or 40s when it was taken. They toured the world doing these roller skating stunt shows, and they were most famous for their one called the Teeth Twirl. And this picture is incredible. Mabel has on roller skates that look like ice skates, really, and George has on a outfit that looks like he's a bellhop. But they have something between them. They're both clutching with their teeth, and Mabel is in the air. He is twirling around. George is twirling around, and Mabel is flying in the air. She's up past his chest. I mean, the picture is...
It's pretty compelling picture.
It is an amazing picture. George and Mabel have one daughter named Iris, and Iris followed in the family footsteps. She became a Vegas showgirl, and she ended up marrying, and this is something that bothers me. This was covered in the Los Angeles magazine, which I love, by an author named Joan Renner in 2013. And she comes short of saying, if Mabel's daughter Iris hadn't married this Las Vegas gambler, Mabel would still be alive. Okay. Except that no, her son-in-law can't be held responsible for the fact that a group of greedy fucking assholes found their way into her house and killed her. So her daughter Iris marries this big-time gambler named Tudor Scherer, also known as Luther Scherer, but his real name is Tudor.
That's a name.
I know! Tutor. Sometimes known as Luther, but his real name is Tudor Scherer. Now, her daughter and Mr. Scherer get divorced, but Mabel remains close to her son-in-law. Now, her daughter remains in Las Vegas, and her son-in-law comes back and forth, I guess illegal gambling, kind of things are set up, and he makes a lot of money. He's apparently very good at it. And one of the things that Iris was able to do for her mother, because her father had passed away, was buy her this home in Burbank. Now, when Iris and Tudor were still married, there's a picture of Mabel and George in front of their house in 1940. And producer Mark will be able to talk about this, I think. Their house was on Whitley Drive, and it was an estate. And they're in front of their daughter's beautiful home, daughter and son-in-law's beautiful home in 1940. It was then demolished to make way for the Hollywood freeway.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, you used to live in that area, didn't you?
I did. I lived right adjacent to Whitley Heights, actually.
Exactly. It's still a beautiful area. But yeah, so her daughter married well, this man who made, a lot of money as a gambler. There were rumors that he would store $100,000 at a time in a safe in his mother-in-law's beautiful, small ranch-style home in Burbank. Rumors of this. Now, Tudor Scherer would never keep more than $500 at a time in cash anywhere on him or near him. The rest would be put somewhere else. And he sort of taught that to Mabel. She would only keep $500 at any time on her person and, around her house, whatever. And she was so cautious that every time she would enter her home, she would open every cabinet, look in every closet, move the shower curtains, make sure no one was there, and then she could relax and settle down. Every time she entered her home. which makes this even more awful when you know what happened to her. Now, her friend, Mrs. Merle Leslie from Van Nuys, had spent the day before her murder with her, and she knew something that Mabel didn't even know that came out after her murder that's somewhat heartbreaking. But so Mrs. Merle Leslie and Mrs. Mabel Monohan had spent the evening of March 8th in 1953 they'd had dinner, and then they had been at a private residence in Studio City playing cards. Now, apparently Mabel wasn't like a card shark. She was very cautious, the way she was in everything in her life. But Mrs. Leslie accompanied her back home after their card game, and it was about 2:30 in the morning. And they walk in on March 9th. They walk into the home. Mrs. Monohan checks every cabinet, looks all around. They have a little snack, and then Mrs. Leslie heads back home to her home in Van Nuys. And this is literally after the entire house has been checked. Now, not long after that, apparently later in the day on March 9th, there's a knock at the door of Mrs. Monohan's home. And she was very, very cautious, as you can imagine. And she doesn't open the door. And the beautiful woman on her front porch says, my car broke down and I need to use your phone. And there are 4 other gentlemen waiting in the bushes in a car with the window down. And they're waiting to see what happens. And it takes a little while, but Barbara Graham convinces Mabel Monohan to let her in, to use her phone. And the gentleman in the bushes can hear what's happening. The gentleman in the car don't know exactly what's happening, but Barbara Graham enters the home. Not long after that, 2 men push their way in, Perkins and Santos, and the other men are waiting in the car. One of them is the safe cracker, known as the safe cracker. They get in the home. They tie her up, Mabel. They hit her in the head. They pistol whip her. And then they put a pillowcase over her head. Now they make quick work of turning her house upside fucking down. They split open the couches. They open mattresses. They're looking everywhere. In the closets for this safe that her son-in-law supposedly had $100,000 that he was having, kept there for him at his mother-in-law's beautiful little ranch home in Burbank. They tear the fucking shit out of the house. At one point, the other 2 men join the group. So there are now 5 of them. And the safecracker says, I can't, this isn't supposed to happen this way. He takes a knife out of his pocket and cuts the duct tape off of Mabel Monohan's mouth. She's gasping for air. She's 69 years old. She's been hit in the head, and she has a pillowcase over her head. She is still alive when these piles of shit leave. Now, I'm going back a little bit in time, and 3 years before her death, her good friend Merle Leslie had gotten information from a palm reader who had seen Mabel's hand while they were playing cards. And the palm reader said, she's going to die of a violent death because of money. Now, her best friend, Merle Leslie, decides not to tell Mabel because she was already so cautious and suspicious and wouldn't let people in her home. She just thought, you know what, that's probably not going to happen. Now, Mabel had her own theories on her death. She thought she would die a violent death herself, but she thought she would drown. I'm not sure why people get these, intuitive hits, but that's what she had thought, that she would always die from drowning. So she probably stayed away from the ocean and pools, etc. But this palm reader had seen her hand and said to Mrs. Leslie, she's going to die a violent death because of money. And 3 years later, Here we go.
Okay, that's kind of creepy.
It's extremely creepy. It's extremely creepy. And these pictures of Mabel Monohan, she's classy and beautiful, even though she's a show person. You know, they had opinions of people that were show people, but you know, she was a beautiful woman and lived a good life. She was sad when her husband died. She had her favorite dog, her Labrador, named Ziggy, and he was still in the home when this all happened. But so at the same time that Merle Leslie and Mabel Monohan are having dinner and then playing a card game, a group of people are meeting at the Smokehouse, one of our favorite restaurants in the San Fernando Valley. It's still there. Been there since 1948. This group, Jack Santo, Emmett Perkins, John True, and Baxter Shorter, who is the safecracker, and Barbara Graham, are having dinner at the Smokehouse. The four men and the beautiful woman are planning to break into Mabel Monohan's home, and, you know, the following night, it turns out to be a little earlier, but they do wait till dark. So it was, you know, less than 24 hours later. So Baxter Shorter is the safecracker, and he didn't really want to bring Barbara along. He actually still had some sort of respect for women. He's like, I don't think we need to bring Barbara in on this. And it was explained to him that, you know, Mrs. Monohan is extremely paranoid and she spooks easily. I think it's going to be easier if we can let a woman get us into the house. So everything went according to plan for the first few minutes, and then it didn't. They were rabid trying to take care of this house and tear it all up to find this $100,000. You know, there's 4 ex-cons and a woman who's a junkie, and they are rabidly trying to get this money and split it up. You know, Barbara is beautiful and 23, and it's heartbreaking that this woman wasn't as compassionate to another woman as you would hope she would be. But Mabel Monohan is at home reading a mystery novel, which is heartbreaking. It's called The Purple Pony Murders. And then she gets this knock on the door, and it's Barbara Graham. And these people get their way into her home. And Barbara Graham has a nickel-plated revolver. Now, here's where it's going to get muddy. Emmett Perkins said that Barbara Graham said, knock her out, hit her with this. Baxter Shorter, the safecracker, when he gets into the home, says, what are you doing? This isn't supposed to be like this. They were going to tie her up and cover her eyes and look around her house and take her money and leave her there. You know, she's a 69-year-old woman. They were like not expecting a fight. It didn't go like that. And Baxter Shorter is the one who said, he really does prove himself to be the person who had some compassion. I mean, granted, he was a safecracker. He made his living stealing other people's money, but he never wanted to kill someone.
Yeah, he doesn't sound like a murderer.
No, he does something later that is an attempt to save her that didn't go well. But he, you know, sees Mabel on the ground and he's like, look, she can't breathe. This isn't supposed to happen. So he cuts the gag off her mouth, but she's already in pretty bad shape. So the house is ransacked. There's no safe. They found out later that one of Mabel's old purses was hanging in her closet with about $500, which is all she'd keep in the house, and $10,000 worth of jewelry. And they completely missed it. They missed it.
Now, these guys were just real Phi Beta Kappas.
They proved themselves to be, real piles of shit. If you didn't think so already, they're piles of shit.
And just so you know what kind of value we're talking about here, I just did a quick search, and 1953 dollars today are 10 times more. So we're talking about, you know, if you're talking about $10,000, you're talking about $100,000 in today's value. Or if it's $100,000, it'd be $1 million.
Wow. Okay. Well, I guess to them, That was more important than, the fact that they left a 69-year-old widow still alive, yet, dying on her own floor. So they figure out quickly that they have bungled this crime. They leave quickly, but before they do, Baxter Shorter goes through a drawer and sees a utility bill with an address on it. He doesn't even know the address because it's dark. They get in their cars and they leave her on the floor with a pillowcase over her head, still alive. Baxter Shorter goes to a gas station and uses a payphone and calls the police and says there's a woman who needs help at this address. Now, unfortunately, whoever took the call said there's no address like this because they were looking in the Los Angeles area and Mrs. Monohan lived in Burbank.
Oh.
And then I don't want to call them a 911 operator because I don't know what it's called in 1953, but the police dispatch person who answered.
Oh, thought it was an address in LA.
Los Angeles.
Oh,
and said
God.
that address doesn't exist, so I don't know where to send anyone.
Because he probably called from an LA phone.
Probably.
Yep, that's what happened.
So Mabel Monohan is left on the floor of her house and she dies. And 2 days later, her gardener shows up to do some extra trimming for her and to also get his paycheck, Mitchell Truesdale. And he sees that the front door is slightly ajar and he knows that would never happen because Mabel is so conscientious. So he pushes the door open a little further so he can get in, and he sees the house is just in complete disarray, and he can smell decomp. He sees blood spatter all over the walls and the floors, and he sees Ziggy, the poor dog, sitting at the back door and whining. So he runs to the neighbor's house and calls the police. And, it's like, it doesn't take long to figure out that this 69-year-old widow who is bound and gagged and left on the floor of her home, bludgeoned and strangled and, with a pillowcase over her head. It doesn't take long to figure out that it's a homicide by person or persons unknown. So her daughter Iris had just come back from visiting her, and she, is like, I don't, how could this happen? She offers a $5,000 reward for, an arrest and conviction. And they really are just going out of their way to try and find out what in the fuck happened. On March 26th, 3 weeks after, in 1953, 5 men are arrested and held for questioning. And they're not involved, except they also arrest Baxter Shorter. So there was a Mickey Cohen lieutenant. I mean, this was some big time stuff. I think they sort of figured out that Mabel's son-in-law had this, career as a gambler and that it might be money motivated. And then there's Baxter Shorter, who had made the phone call, who had cut off her gag, who had not wanted her to be killed and just wanted to open the safe and get the money out. Baxter Shorter realizes, I need to talk. There's usually only one opportunity for somebody to get less time. And at this time in our nation's history, it was the gas chamber. And it reminds me so much, Barbara Graham's story reminds the perpetrator, reminds me so much of that scene in The Player where Bruce Willis breaks into the the gas chamber to save
with cyanide
Julia
gas.
Roberts.
Right.
It's really, I think Robert Altman must have taken, or the writer, Michael Tolan, I think, wrote The Player, and Robert Altman directed it. I think he must have taken that part of The Player. He must have taken it from the Barbara Graham story, because it's very much like that, where someone, traffic was hell or whatever,
Oh God.
I know. Yeah, that reminded me very much of what happened to Barbara Graham. So Baxter Shorter says, look, I was just supposed to be the lookout. And then he later on says, all right, look, I was supposed to be the safecracker. And there was supposed to be a safe in the house with $100,000. It was pretty clear that there wasn't. And, you know, by the time I got in the house, they had already hit Mrs. Monohan on the head with the butt of the gun. You know, I couldn't stand to watch what they were doing to her, which actually they say was probably the truest statement that he was ever able to say, because he was more terrified of the death penalty. But things don't go well for him either. When it's found out that Baxter Shorter had spoken to the police, and he's no angel, right? He's had a life of crime. He's at his home with his wife a few weeks later, and there's a knock at the door. His wife, Olivia, is aware of his business dealings that are, you know, below the law. And someone says, come on, you're coming with me. And he has a pistol in his hand. And Olivia runs to the kitchen and gets a shotgun and points it at the person pointing the gun at her husband. And he said, if you don't put that down, he's going to die right here. And Baxter says, it's okay, honey. It's all right. Go back in. And Baxter is taken. And his wife calls the police and says, my husband was taken at gunpoint. And here's the person who did it. She picks out from mugshots Emmett Perkins without hesitating. She picks out Emmett Perkins. And Baxter Shorter has never been heard from again.
They never found his body or
nope,
anything?
Nothing. Not any trace of him has been found. So it's 3 weeks later. Emmett Perkins has gotten rid of Baxter Shorter. He, I believe, thinks that, you know, things are going to go, you know, his way because there's nobody to kind of tell on him. It's Barbara Graham's addiction to heroin that gets all of them caught. So Barbara Graham buys heroin from an undercover policewoman, and they follow her as she gets on a bus and goes to an apartment in Huntington Park. The undercover officer then says, we need backup because I don't know who's in there. Now, this is the weird part. I mean, it's all weird, but Barbara Graham is alternately referred to as bottle blonde, bleach blonde, all of the words that one uses to describe someone in the 50s. My favorite is a copper blonde, because apparently at one point she was a redhead, but her real natural color, I guess, was brown. But she has now dyed her hair vibrantly blonde, and she buys the heroin, shoots up in a park bathroom, gets on her bus, goes back to in a crappy apartment, and within minutes, the LAPD detectives are busting down the door. And she was nude and was about to bend over, and she stands up straight, and there's a sofa bed that's open in this crappy apartment, and Jack Santo is laying on the bed with an erection, and Emmett Perkins is naked and walks out of the bathroom. So there was Barbara Graham naked, Jack Santo naked on the bed with an erection, and Emmett Perkins walking out of the bathroom. And apparently Emmett Perkins is the first to say, don't shoot, don't shoot. Yeah, okay. Well, you killed an old woman for no reason, and you've probably done a lot worse. You kidnapped and killed Baxter Shorter because you were afraid he was going to, you know, finger you, so to speak. So don't shoot, don't shoot. Yeah, okay, good for you. So this becomes this very popular case in the media because of Barbara's beauty. She really is beautiful. I mean, she's, like I said, described as, golden haired, bottle blonde, copper blonde, shapely thighs, bronzed complexion, blah, 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 strong hands. She really is a very beautiful woman. And apparently that was one of those things that when she was younger made her life difficult. Some people embrace their beauty. Some people use their beauty to their advantage. Some people are taken advantage of because of their beauty. And apparently, she was a sex worker. She was a prostitute. She was, she went from being like labeled promiscuous to being, a prostitute. I don't know that she was arrested several times in San Francisco, but I don't know that she was like some hardened career criminal. I think she was involved with Emmett Perkins. She had left her husband and her kid. They only talk about one, but she had 3. And she had left them, and she was just hanging around this group of terrible people and got, involved. I mean, this was her own doing. She wasn't coerced. I mean, there are probably those that would say that she was, but I believe that it's pretty well known that this was her own doing. So she, because of her beauty and because it's a female, all of these newspapers in the Los Angeles area are at the time owned by William Randolph Hearst. And he apparently had a penchant for true crime stories, which is...
Oh, absolutely. It was all... Hearst's newspapers across the country were all very populist, very... they're like tabloids are today.
I see.
And back then he owned the Los Angeles, either the Examiner or the Herald. It eventually became the Herald Examiner. And his papers were well known for whipping up public emotion.
There you go. Well, that makes sense then, because, she was, it really is almost cartoonish the way she's described so differently by so many different journalists. It's very, it's very salacious, and it's very interesting. And it's, it has these parallels to this, decades much older, much newer case of Lisa Montgomery. It's because she's a woman. And it's, while Lisa Montgomery was a very cute girl, she looked pretty bad before her execution. I'm guessing, that jail life isn't really good for you. And it's, they both kind of got their way into a woman's home. They both did terrible things. One for money, one, I guess, for a child. I don't even really know that Lisa Montgomery wanted a child. I don't know enough about her case. But so Barbara Graham, is intelligent and beautiful. She does a couple of things while in prison. She was apparently bisexual, and she friended a cellmate who said she could, for $500, get her an alibi from a friend of a friend. And the friend is, of course, an undercover officer who shows up with a tape recorder and says, okay, what are the details? I'll say I was with you that night. It couldn't be me. I wasn't there. You weren't there. So, that is used against her in court.
Oh, jeez.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. And she, on the tape, she says, if it weren't for you, I would be going to the gas chamber, if it weren't for this story. So, I mean, I don't know. I feel bad even saying this, but what I feel bad for is Mabel Monohan, who, was living her life. She was a 69-year-old widow who needed to live her life out without something like this happening. I do have to say, hearing about the administration of lethal gas, it sounds really terrible. It sounds terrible.
Oh, it's awful. It's cyanide gas.
Yeah. That's terrible. And something else that proponents of Barbara's case think is terrible is the number of times her execution was stayed, and right up till the last minute. All of these parallels with the recent Lisa Montgomery case. The governor at the time, she was supposed to have died on June 3rd at 10 p.m. And the governor, she's like, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go. She had sort of embraced religion in prison. All of her appeals had been denied after a while. On June 3rd at 10 p.m., a priest meets her. There's an execution team that comes. She wants to go in a champagne wool suit with brown high heels and earrings and a crucifix around her neck. There's a wheelchair brought for her at her cell, and she's like, I don't need that. She's like, I'm ready to go. And she's, 32 at the time. She's, still very young. But she's like, I've had enough of life. Now, her other quote that bothers me is her last words. The second to last sentence, she said, good people always think they're right. Well, good people probably don't kill a 69-year-old widow in her home for something that never even existed, a safe full of money. So the priest accompanies her and says, it's time, we're going, and she says, it's okay, Father. I don't feel any hatred. I feel pity for everyone who will have to live with what they've done to me. So the governor at the time, there's a phone call as they're walking into a holding cell. His name is Governor Knight. And the warden says, he's instructed me to delay the proceedings. And the priest says, why? And the warden says, I don't know, some sort of a legal technicality. So Barbara is taken out of that cell and into a holding room next to the cell. So at 10:25, the phone rings again. And the warden says, go ahead with the execution. They are walking her down the hall. There's a priest, the doctor, and there's a prison matron there with her to help steady her if she needs it. And she's just about to step into the death chamber. And there is a phone call.
Oh, my God.
And the warden turns pale. And he said, the governor has ordered another delay. And Barbara says, I can't take this. Why couldn't they just let me go at 10? I was ready to go at 10 p.m. So at 11:18, the phone rings again. And the governor says, I can't find any provable evidence to delay this any longer. By this time, Barbara's saying, why are they torturing me like this? So she was shivering from the cold, yet perspiring heavily. A prison matron dabbed her forehead and cheeks. At 11:18, an hour and 18 minutes after she was initially supposed to have been put into the gas chamber, she's put in. And she said, can you cover my eyes? And the matron says, I have a sleep mask. And she went back to the holding cell and got it out of her purse. So she puts the sleep mask on her, and the matron is trying to comfort her and says, count to 10 after you hear the cyanide tablets drop, and then take a deep breath. It's easier that way. And Barbara turns toward the matron and says, how the hell would you know? Those are her last words. She is finally pronounced dead at 11:42. Now, she stays strapped in this chair for an hour and a half because the exhaust fan above the gas chamber has to suck the fumes out. Her body is then removed. The chamber is, defumigated. And then the other two, Perkins and Santo, are put into the same cell. And they went much quieter and much more quickly. She has There's a funeral for Barbara. Her husband was there. Her son was not there. Some friends of hers from her days back in Oakland and the San Francisco area were there. Apparently they called her Bonnie as a child, and they said, no one really loved her. Her own mother never cared about her. That really bothered her. She couldn't understand why her own mother wouldn't love her. But she has kids, She has kids of her own. And you can say she had a drug addiction, she, had mental illness. You can say all the same things about Barbara Graham that you can about Lisa Montgomery. Now, there are still a lot of people that feel Barbara Graham is innocent. Her friends said, she did a lot of things that were wrong and against the law, but I never believed she was guilty of this crime. There are 2 movies done about her life, and one starred Susan Hayward. Both of them are entitled I Want to Live. And the one with Susan Hayward, Susan received the Academy Award for Best Actress. The screenplay was nominated, the director was nominated. And even in her own life and her biography, Susan Hayward said, I was fascinated by the contradictory traits of this personality, this strangely controversial woman who had an extraordinary effect on everyone she met. She was a juvenile, and then she was an adult, and then she was arrested, and then she did this, and somewhere along the line, she tried to be a good wife, but that didn't work. None of what she ever was squared with the picture that was drawn of her in the trial, and I became so fascinated by this woman, I simply had to play her. She finally admits, Susan Hayward admits, I believe that Barbara is guilty, but I don't know that I believe she pistol whipped Mabel Monohan. And the truth is, if Barbara hadn't gotten the front door open by talking Mabel Monohan into letting her in, nobody would have pistol whipped her. You can say that her son-in-law, it was his fault for having a lot of money, making a lot of money, and having rumors out there that he kept money at his mother-in-law's home. But we can't really pin the blame on him. We don't even know where those rumors came from. It could have just been, idle talk. And we found out that wasn't true. There was no safe that she kept there. Barbara Graham participated in a terrible thing. And as we know, if someone dies in the commission of a crime, it doesn't matter if you're the lookout or driving the car, you're just as culpable. You're just as culpable. And Susan Hayward took the role in the film that won her an Academy Award. It was, again, as I said, nominated for Best Director, Best Screenplay, Cinematography, Sound, Editing. And one of my favorite lines in this description is, there's no Academy Award for truth. So there are definitely people who feel that the film, it's not a documentary, and they feel it's way too fictionalized, the life of Barbara Graham. It was remade as a TV movie in 1983 with Lindsay Wagner, the Bionic Woman. And it was also called I Want to Live, but without the exclamation mark. I do have to say that the pictures from the film, the posters from the 1958 film are incredibly beautiful. I mean, it's very much that old school, faster pussycat kill kind of thing. Very highly colorized. They fictionalized her life, and in my mind, losing a little bit of Mabel Monohan's story in the sensationalism of Barbara Graham's involvement. There are quotes that she actually helped dig Baxter Shorter's grave. Emmett Perkins said she got right in there and started digging his grave. She stood flat-footed and hit Baxter Shorter in the face with a shovel and said, "You dirty son of a bitch, you're never going to squeal again." All of these things are not proven. These are all the same kind of rumors that, ended up with Mabel Monohan being murdered. Maybe not listening to rumors is one way to go. But I do have to say that Barbara Graham's quote, that good people always think they're so right. Yeah, it's okay. It's okay, Barbara. Good people don't break into 69-year-old widows' homes and kill them for no reason either. So maybe being a good person is okay to think you're right. And more cowbell.
If you would like to support this podcast, go to patreon.com/justthetipsters.